The moment the doors of the royal machine quietly shifted on March 10, 2026, something explosive happened behind palace walls. Something the public barely noticed, but insiders say could permanently reshape the balance of power inside the House of Windsor. Because according to internal records and palace documentation, the estates once personally protected by the late Queen Elizabeth II were suddenly placed under the direct command of the future king, Prince William. And the move didn't just reorganize property, it slammed the door on a brewing royal business empire tied to the family of Queen Camilla. The transition was presented publicly as routine estate management, a calm administrative adjustment finalized during Commonwealth Day events, but palace insiders whisper that what actually happened was closer to a legal eviction executed with surgical precision. Because hidden inside decades of royal paperwork was a legal weapon prepared years earlier by the late Queen herself, an obscure clause designed to protect her private lands from being turned into profit machines by relatives who entered the family through marriage after 2010. And once that clause was activated, the consequences were immediate. Entire commercial plans collapsed overnight. Access privileges disappeared, and powerful people suddenly found themselves locked out of lands they believed they were about to monetize. At precisely 8 a.m., security control over several royal estates quietly transferred into William's command structure, a move verified by internal security protocols. To the outside world, it looked like nothing more than a logistical update, but inside palace corridors, it meant something far bigger. The final consolidation of control over 6 private estates, including Cedar Estate and Northacker Hall. And here's where the story takes a darker twist, because those same estates had reportedly become the center of ambitious commercial proposals linked to Tom Parker Bowles, son of Queen Camilla. Plans circulating among investors reportedly envisioned luxury hospitality projects, boutique retreats, and even high-end culinary branding tied to royal heritage. The pitch was simple but explosive: turn Windsor legacy into premium lifestyle products. Except the late Queen had anticipated exactly this kind of move. Years earlier, she quietly drafted a legal safeguard that would prevent anyone entering the family through marriage after 2010 from gaining administrative influence over certain private holdings. Once Prince William invoked that clause, every proposed partnership tied to those estates instantly became void. But the chain reaction actually began one day earlier, when Princess Anne, operating in her capacity as head of the Crown Trust Authority, triggered a sweeping forensic audit of the royal archives at Windsor Castle. During that investigation, archivists uncovered a classified document signed by the late Queen in 2021, Appendix R3, a legal codicil that redefined the Cedar Estate not as a negotiable family asset, but as an untouchable sovereign holding. In simple terms, it meant the property could never be repurposed for commercial ventures without direct authorization from the reigning monarch. The moment that document was authenticated, Anne issued a lockout order that revoked access permissions for external consultants and halted every development discussion surrounding Northacker Hall. Around the same time, another investigation was unfolding in the digital shadows. Lady Louise Windsor, conducting a forensic review of international corporate registries, discovered something unexpected: a Luxembourg-based shell company called Hill and Crown Limited. The executive director listed on the filings was Tom Parker Bowles, and the company had already begun registering royal-themed trademarks connected to the Cedar Estate hunting crest. According to the forensic analysis, the crest, never authorized for public use, had already been prepared for branding on luxury wine labels, gourmet honey jars, and artisanal food packaging destined for international markets. When the evidence reached King Charles, the reaction was swift. At 10 a.m., the king reportedly invoked sovereign immunity to place the estates under absolute constitutional protection, legally sealing them from commercial disputes. The move effectively destroyed any argument that the properties could be treated as shared family assets or investment opportunities. By 5 p.m., the same day, palace insiders say the final phase of the strategy had begun, a quiet institutional pivot insiders now call the Great Silence. And that silence may be hiding even more than anyone expected. The silence that followed inside the royal institution was not the calm kind that signals resolution. It was the heavy, calculated quiet of a palace that had just slammed several doors at once. Because while the public only saw polished smiles and formal ceremonies, insiders described those hours after March 10 as the moment the monarchy sealed a new power structure around the future king, Prince William. Behind the scenes, the estates once protected by the late Queen Elizabeth II were no longer simply family properties. They had been transformed into fortified institutional assets that could not be touched by outside commercial ambition. The strategy unfolded with astonishing speed. Within hours of the lockout, William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, quietly signed the founding charter of something called the Greenheath Royal Future Trust, a newly created framework designed to absorb the disputed estates and permanently remove them from the orbit of private business interests. And the most shocking detail hidden inside the charter: the trust was suddenly funded funded by a secret reserve of nearly £37 million that had been quietly sitting in a private fund created during the Queen's lifetime. Money that even some senior members of the household reportedly didn't know existed. From that moment forward, the estates, Cedar Estate, North Acker Hall, and surrounding lands were legally repurposed as non-profit sanctuaries dedicated to environmental research and youth rehabilitation programs. To the outside world, the move looked noble, almost serene, a graceful philanthropic gesture from the next generation of royals. But inside palace walls, the decision carried a much sharper edge. Because by transforming the land into non-profit trust property, William had effectively erased the possibility of turning those estates into luxury hotels, boutique retreats, or lifestyle brands forever. Every acre now sat inside a legal fortress where commercial conversion would be impossible. The palace called it stewardship. Critics quietly called it the final eviction. Yet, even after the estates were secured, one mystery refused to disappear. During the final audit of the royal archives, an investigation personally supervised by Princess Anne, archivists discovered something buried deep within a sealed chest that had not been catalogued during earlier estate reviews. Inside was a handwritten letter dated September 8, 2022, written by Queen Elizabeth herself shortly before her passing. The letter referenced a third-party financier operating from outside the United Kingdom who had allegedly been providing covert funding to business entities connected to the same commercial projects that had targeted the estates. The implications were explosive. If the document was accurate, it meant the attempted monetization of royal heritage wasn't just a family disagreement, it had outside financial backing waiting in the shadows. The timing of that revelation turned Commonwealth Day at Westminster Abbey into something far more symbolic than the public realized. As King Charles III and Prince William walked together through the Abbey, the visual message seemed simple: unity, stability, continuity. But insiders say that moment was carefully choreographed to signal something deeper. The institutional realignment was complete. The estates were sealed under William's authority. The commercial proposals were dismantled. And the legal architecture protecting those lands, from the anticipatory obstruction clause to sovereign immunity, had been activated like interlocking shields. Behind closed doors, the aftermath was described as a structural shutdown of every venture linked to the Parker Bowles business network. Luxury retailers reportedly distanced themselves. Publishing contracts evaporated. Trademark filings tied to royal imagery were frozen or withdrawn once intellectual property infringement notices began circulating. The digital investigation led by Lady Louise Windsor had already mapped the trail of unauthorized crest usage, revealing how centuries-old royal symbols had been prepared for commercial branding without formal approval from the crown. Once that evidence reached legal authorities, the business architecture surrounding those plans began collapsing piece by piece. And still, the palace refused to explain any of it publicly. No dramatic press conference, no public accusations, just silence. The Great Silence, as some insiders now call it. The monarchy's strategy appears to be simple: secure the assets, neutralize the commercial threats, and allow the entire confrontation to disappear quietly behind the walls of royal protocol. But that final letter discovered in the archives has left investigators with one lingering question that has not yet been answered. Who exactly was the foreign financier mentioned in the Queen's final note, and how far had the investment plans progressed before the legal lockout happened? For now, the official narrative is calm and controlled. The estates are protected. The trust is operational. The legacy of Queen Elizabeth is preserved under the stewardship of her grandson. Yet beneath that polished surface, palace insiders hint that the investigation into external financial influence has only just begun. Because if someone outside the royal orbit was already funding projects tied to those lands, then the struggle for the Queen's hidden estates might not have been just an internal family dispute after all. It might have been the first move in a much larger game that almost slipped into the monarchy's private foundations without anyone noticing. And somewhere within the sealed archives of Windsor Castle, the remaining documents that could explain the full story are still locked away, waiting for the moment someone decides the silence is no longer necessary.